I still remember that morning, the one that changed everything. The air was quiet, the kind of silence you only notice when something feels off. When I opened my front door, there it was, a bright orange paper flapping in the wind. Eviction notice. For a second, I just stood there. My coffee went cold in my hand. I must have read those words a dozen times, thinking maybe I was misunderstanding them. Evicted? From my house? The same house I'd paid for in full. Every brick and nail? It didn't make sense. But then again, nothing about life in Willowbrook Estates ever had. I'd moved here a year after my divorce. My name's Marcus, though most folks just call me Mac. After 20 years of marriage and one ugly breakup, all I wanted was peace. No mortgage, no arguments. Just a quiet house where I could fix things, cook my own dinner, and breathe. When I bought this little place on Elmwood Drive, I thought I'd finally found that peace. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, chipped fence and all. That old wooden fence had been there longer than most of the neighbors. It stood like a guard, weathered and stubborn, a lot like me. For months, life was simple. I go to work, come home, mow my own lawn, wave to the folks walking their dogs. But then she moved in. Dolores Blackwood. If you've ever met someone who makes you feel tired just by standing next to them, that was Dolores. Always dressed like she was running for mayor, clipboard in hand, chin tilted like she owned the sky. At first, she was just another neighbor. But within weeks, she somehow became president of the newly reactivated HOA, the homeowners association that most of us didn't even know existed anymore. That's when my quiet life turned into a war I never signed up for. The first letter came a week later, a friendly reminder about my fence. Non-compliant, it said. Apparently, the faded paint violated aesthetic standards. I ignored it, thought it was a mistake. The second letter wasn't as friendly. Then came the fines, $50 here, $100 there. Each envelope had her name stamped at the bottom like a signature of control. I tried reasoning with her, told her that fence had been there long before any HOA was formed. She smiled the kind of smile people use when they think they've already beaten you. "I'm sure you'll get it fixed, Mr. Mack," she said, turning away before I could answer. From that day on, I started keeping records. Every letter, every photo, every little rule she twisted. Something inside me said this wasn't going to end easily. Still, I never thought she'd go this far. Eviction from a home I owned outright. That orange paper was more than just a notice. It was a declaration of war. I looked down the street that morning and saw curtains shifting. People were watching. Some sympathetic, some scared, most silent. That's how it goes in places like Willowbrook. Nobody wants to get involved. Not until it's too late. I took a deep breath and pulled the paper off the door. If Dolores wanted a fight, she was about to get one. I went back inside, sat at my kitchen table, and laid out every document I'd collected. Letters, photos, dates, even the old property map I'd dug up at the county office last fall. Something told me these papers might end up saving me. That day, I called my lawyer. He sighed when he heard the story. "Another HOA horror," he said. "You'd be surprised how common this is." But even he didn't know just how deep this was about to go. Because what Dolores didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that every time she'd slipped a letter into my mailbox, she'd handed me another piece of evidence. And I was about to turn her own rules against her. You know, when you live alone long enough, you start talking to your house. That morning, I looked at those old walls and thought, "Don't worry, buddy. I built you. No one's taking you away." I wasn't angry yet, not really, just stunned. But behind that calm, something stronger was forming. A kind of quiet determination that only comes when a man's been pushed too far. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. The fines, the court threats, the humiliation, it would all come crashing down in the weeks that followed. And somewhere in the middle of that storm, I'd find out just how far people will go for power, and how much one man can take before he decides to fight back. Before all this madness, before the orange paper, I'd almost liked Dolores. She'd hosted a welcome barbecue once, all smiles and casseroles, promising to bring unity to the neighborhood. But behind that smile was something else. Control, the kind that feeds on fear and silence. It started small, a fine for leaving my trash bins out too long. Then one for excessive lighting because I'd hung an extra bulb over my garage. At first, I paid them. I just wanted peace. But peace, I learned, isn't something you can buy. Soon, others began whispering. Tom from 2 doors down got fined for a garden gnome. Sandra got cited for unauthorized flowers. Everyone grumbled, but nobody challenged her. I was the first to say no, and that's when she set her sights on me. That eviction notice was supposed to break me, but instead it woke something up, because I knew something Dolores didn't. Something hidden deep in those dusty county records. Months earlier, when this all started, I'd spent an afternoon digging through files at the courthouse. Old maps, bylaws, scanned deeds, everything I could find about Willowbrook Estates. That's when I discovered it. A clause buried in the original HOA charter. A grandfather clause protecting all pre-existing structures from new aesthetic regulations. In other words, my fence was untouchable. I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Because sometimes the best way to win a fight is to let your opponent think they're winning first. That night, I sat on my porch under the same flickering light she once called non-compliant. The eviction notice lay folded in my pocket. And for the first time in months, I smiled. She thought this was the end of my story. But really, it was just the start of hers. Because when people like Dolores play dirty, they forget that some of us know how to build things, not just fix them. And I was about to rebuild this whole neighborhood, one courtroom at a time. They say power doesn't change people. It just shows you who they really are. If that's true, then Dolores Blackwood had been waiting her whole life to wear a crown. When she moved into Willowbrook Estates, nobody paid much attention. A polite smile, a firm handshake, a pie for the neighbors, the usual performance. But within weeks, she was everywhere. At the mailbox, at the park, even stopping dog walkers to discuss community standards. Then one Saturday, we got the letter. Notice of Homeowners Association reactivation meeting. Most of us tossed it aside. The HOA had been quiet for over a decade, and frankly, we liked it that way. But Dolores showed up that day with a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. By the time the meeting ended, she'd volunteered to temporarily oversee operations. Temporary, right? Within a month, she was Madam President, and Willowbrook Estates had new rules, new fees, and a new sheriff in town. At first, it seemed harmless. Newsletters, landscaping tips, block parties. But hidden between the cheerful emails were the real changes. Mandatory aesthetic review. Updated compliance standards. Neighborhood improvement assessments. Most of us didn't notice. Until the fines started. The first knock on my door came early on a Monday. A man in a polo shirt handed me a yellow envelope. Inside, a $250 fine for deteriorating fence structure. I almost laughed. That fence had been standing since 1978, back when half these houses didn't even exist. I called the number listed at the bottom. Dolores answered herself. "Good morning, Mr. Mack," she said, her tone sweet as syrup. "I see you've received your notice." The board voted unanimously. "There's no board," I said. "Just you." "Then the vote was easy," she replied. Click. That was my first lesson in HOA politics. Never expect fairness when someone's feeding on control. A week later, I came home to find a bright pink tag hanging from my mailbox. Non-compliant mail structure, it read. Apparently, the wood post didn't match neighborhood color palette standards. I started asking around. Tom, 2 doors down, got fined for parking his pickup in the driveway. Sandra, the retired nurse across the street, got written up for unauthorized vegetation. Even Mrs. Hill, who baked cookies for everyone, got a warning about her offensive garden ornaments. Dolores was on a mission, and we were all her subjects. Some neighbors started fixing things, repainting, replacing, paying just to keep her quiet. But a few of us, me included, decided not to give in. And that's when things got personal. It started with petty tricks. My trash cans would mysteriously get dragged into the street after pickup. Letters would vanish from my mailbox. Then one night, I woke up to find someone had sprayed my fence with orange paint, the same shade used on HOA violation notices. I reported it. Dolores said it was probably teenagers. Then came the gossip. Little whispers around the neighborhood that I was difficult, uncooperative, unstable. You could see it in people's eyes, that polite discomfort when they passed me on the sidewalk. I'd been branded. Sometimes I'd sit on my porch and watch her do her evening rounds. clipboard in one hand, flashlight in the other, jotting notes like she was running a military inspection. She loved being watched. It gave her power. And me, it gave a reason to keep recording. I installed cameras. Quietly, one by one, around the yard, the porch, the mailbox. If she was going to play dirty, I make sure every move was caught in high definition. For months, I documented everything. Every visit, every inspection, every rule she twisted. What started as self-defense became a mission. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she was bullying. Then came the annual dues increase. Without warning, she tripled the fees. Said it was for neighborhood improvements. When we asked what improvements, she smiled and said, "You'll see." A month later, new streetlights appeared, conveniently installed by her cousin's company. The HOA account? Empty. I confronted her during the next meeting. "Where's the money going, Dolores?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Mack. If you can't abide by our community values, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you." That was the moment she crossed the line from petty tyrant to something worse. Someone who believed she owned us. After that meeting, the letters came faster. One after another. Fences, grass length, mailbox height. She even fined me for having unsightly tools visible through the garage window. By summer, I'd racked up nearly $4,000 in HOA fines. And then, the letter that changed everything. Notice of intent to foreclose. It was surreal. They claimed that under HOA bylaws, unpaid fines could result in a lien and forced sale of property, all over a fence older than the HOA itself. I remember staring at the paper, thinking, this can't be legal. That's when I decided, no more waiting. I'd dig deeper. I took a week off work and drove down to the county records office. A dusty room with flickering lights and cabinets full of forgotten papers. Most folks would have given up after the first hour. But I'm an electrician. Patience is part of the job. I searched every file labeled Willowbrook. Deeds, amendments, maps, annexations. And then there it was, the original HOA charter from 1982. Half the pages were faded, but one line stood out clear as daylight. Existing structures prior to the ratification of the Willowbrook Estates Covenant shall remain exempt from subsequent aesthetic regulations. My fence was grandfathered in. Perfectly legal. They couldn't touch it. Not even Dolores. I made copies. Dozens of them. And from that day, every fine that showed up went straight into a folder labeled evidence. I didn't say a word to her. Let her keep digging her own hole. She escalated again. Started calling city inspectors, claiming unsafe property conditions. They came, looked around, and left shaking their heads. Everything was up to code. That didn't stop her. She filed a formal complaint in civil court. Claimed I was devaluing neighborhood property and creating hostility. When I got the court summons, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it meant the battle was finally official. No more notes on doors. No more whispers. Just me, her, and the truth under oath. You know, I used to think people like Dolores were just lonely, trying to fill the emptiness with control. But I was wrong. Control wasn't a symptom. It was the goal. She fed on it. The power to decide what color your mailbox could be, who could park where, who belonged and who didn't. And once you give someone like that a clipboard and a title, you might as well hand them a crown. The court date was set for mid-August. Hot, heavy weather, the kind that makes tempers short and patience shorter. I spent nights organizing documents, rehearsing my statement, reviewing every photo and letter. My lawyer, Dan, kept shaking his head. "Mac, you've built quite a case here. But HOA courts are tricky. They play by their own rules." "Then I'll bring my own," I said, because I knew what he didn't. They say every storm starts with a whisper. Mine began with a knock on the door. It was Dan, my lawyer. He stood there holding a stack of papers thick enough to break your spirit. "Discovery documents," he said. "Everything they plan to use against you." I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table that had seen every letter, every fine, every late-night plan. He spread the papers out like cards in a bad game of poker. Most of it was nonsense. Photos of my fence, copies of complaint letters, a few anonymous neighbor reports, all signed by one name, Dolores Blackwood. I looked at Dan, She really thinks this is enough to take my house. He sighed. It's not about the house, Mac. It's about pride. People like her don't stop until someone makes them. He was right, and I was done waiting. The weeks before the hearing felt endless. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The ones who used to wave now crossed the street when they saw me coming. It's funny how fear works. Contagious as a cold, silent as dust. But then, one afternoon, I came home to find a note taped to my garage. It wasn't from Dolores. It was from Sandra, the retired nurse. It said, "Keep fighting, Mac. We're watching. You're not alone." It was just 5 words, but they hit me harder than any fine ever could. For the first time in months, I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. That night, I started building what I called the binder. Every letter, every video clip, every time-stamped record. I even printed screenshots from security footage showing Dolores walking around my property at night, clipboard glowing under her flashlight. I organized everything by date and violation type. I didn't know if it would win a case, but sure as hell told a story. Dan stopped by a few days later to review it. He flipped through the pages and whistled. "Mac, this is better documentation than most corporate audits." I smiled. That's what happens when you tick off an electrician with free evenings. But under the humor, there was a heaviness. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what would happen if I lost. Would they really sell my house? Where would I go? Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to Sarah, my ex-wife, even though she wasn't there. She'd always told me I was too proud. Maybe she was right. But this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about fairness. About not letting bullies rewrite the rules of your own life. A week before the hearing, something strange happened. Dolores dropped off a final settlement offer. She said if I paid $5,000 in back fines, she'd withdraw the motion and restore good standing. I laughed when I read it. $5,000 for peace that was never hers to sell. I signed the bottom of the letter with one word: declined. The night before the hearing, the neighborhood felt different. Still, quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Even the air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. I walked my fence one last time, running my hand over the rough wood. Each groove told a story of storms, summers, and the years I'd worked to build something stable. I thought about tearing it down once, but now it felt like armor. When I went back inside, I noticed something new on the porch. A small envelope. No name, just a note inside. "We believe in you. Make her answer for all of us." There were no signatures, but I didn't need them. That handwriting came from different hands, different ages. The quiet people had finally found a voice. The next morning, I put on my old blue suit, the one I hadn't worn since the divorce hearing. I stood in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and whispered, "Round 2, Marcus. Let's do it right this time." Dan picked me up at 9 sharp. On the drive, he stayed quiet, just drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Finally, he said, Most people cave before it gets this far." "Most people don't have a fence like mine," I said, half smiling. He chuckled. "Fair enough." The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder air. Dolores was already there, standing tall in a charcoal suit, flanked by 2 board members I'd never even seen before. When our eyes met, she smiled that same rehearsed smile. But this time I smiled back. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, called us to order. Case number 4923, Willowbrook Estates, HOA versus Marcus McAllister. I stood, hand steady, voice calm. For the next hour, Dolores and her lawyer laid out their case. Photos of fences, quotes from bylaws, words like community cohesion and visual harmony. It sounded polished, almost convincing, but it was built on paper, not truth. When it was my turn, I opened the binder. Page after page, I walked the judge through every step of her campaign. The fines, the harassment, the missing funds. Then I handed him the copy of the 1982 charter, pointing to the line that had kept me awake for months. He leaned forward, reading it twice. Then he looked up. "Ms. Blackwood," he said slowly, "this clause clearly exempts the defendant's property from your current standards." She froze. That must be an outdated version," she stammered. I slid another document forward. "Certified copy from the county records, Your Honor. Still valid." The room went silent. You could feel the air shift. That quiet moment when a bully realizes the crowd isn't afraid anymore. The judge turned to her lawyer. Did your client verify the current charter before issuing these fines? He hesitated. Not personally, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Then perhaps the court should verify her qualifications to serve as HOA president. Dolores' face flushed crimson. For the first time, she looked small. When it was over, the judge dismissed the case entirely. He even hinted that further investigation might be warranted regarding financial mismanagement. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I just nodded, thanked the judge, and gathered my papers. Outside, the summer sun hit my face, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel heavy. Dan clapped me on the shoulder. You just made HOA history, my friend. That night, I sat on my porch, same light, same old fence, same quiet street. Except now, people started walking by again. Sandra waved. Tom stopped to shake my hand. Even Mrs. Hill left a plate of cookies at my doorstep. The silence that once felt suffocating suddenly felt peaceful again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because you don't change a system by winning one case. You change it by telling the story loud enough that nobody can ignore it. Over the next few months, local reporters came knocking. Man defeats HOA tyrant, one headline said. Another called it the Willowbrook Rebellion. I didn't seek attention, but when they asked, I told them everything. Not for revenge, but for awareness. And somewhere along the way, a state legislator reached out. He said my case was the push they needed to introduce a bill protecting homeowners from HOA overreach. They called it Max Law. I never asked for that, but knowing that no one else would face what I did, that was enough. Sometimes I still find those old notices tucked inside books or drawers. Little reminders of a storm that passed. But I keep one pinned on my fridge, the first eviction notice. Not out of anger, but gratitude. Because that paper didn't end my peace. It gave it back to me. They say victory feels sweet. But the truth? It feels quiet. When the gavel came down that day, I didn't cheer. Didn't smile. I just exhaled, a slow breath that had been trapped in my chest for almost a year. For the first time in months, I slept without my phone beside me, without checking the window for flashlights or letters taped to my door. When I woke up the next morning, the world hadn't changed much, but something inside me had. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and finally free. But peace, like always in Willowbrook, didn't last long. 3 days later, word spread like wildfire. Dolores had been removed as HOA president. Apparently, the county had opened an audit, not just on her finances, but on her conduct. Turns out, she'd been running the HOA like her own private empire, issuing fines without board approval, cashing checks into a personal operating account, even contracting her relatives for community projects. When the story broke, the neighborhood chat groups lit up. People who'd once stayed silent finally spoke up. Tom posted photos of his own fake violations. Sandra shared emails showing how Dolores had threatened to sue her for insubordination. Even Mrs. Hill admitted she'd been paying double dues because Dolores told her she was behind. It was like a collective unburdening, everyone finally exhaling after months of fear. And for once, my name wasn't the one being whispered on the street. I thought about ignoring it all, just keeping to myself. But something about seeing those people, my neighbors, finally stand tall again, it stirred something in me. So when a local reporter called, asking for a comment, I said yes. They came by the house, same porch, same coffee mug, same old fence behind me. The reporter asked, "Why didn't you just move?" I smiled. Because you don't leave your home to escape bullies. You fix what's broken and make sure it doesn't happen again. That line ended up printed on the front page of the local paper. And that's when things really started to shift. A week later, I got a call from a man named Representative Allen Price. He said he'd been following my case and wanted to meet. We met at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place with coffee that tastes like courage and burnt toast. He listened as I told him everything, from the first notice to the court ruling. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You know, Mac, this isn't just a neighborhood problem. This is happening all over the state." That was the first time I heard the word Max Law. At first, I laughed. Max Law? That sounds like something out of a Western. He grinned. Maybe, but we need a name people remember. The proposal was simple. HOAs could no longer issue liens or foreclosure actions for unpaid fines alone. They'd have to prove real damage or legal costs. It also required transparency, open records, real elections, and term limits for HOA boards. It wasn't flashy, but it meant freedom, the kind that protects people like Sandra, like Tom, like me. Over the next few months, my life changed in ways I never expected. Reporters came, then lawyers, then a documentary crew. I wasn't chasing fame, but the story had taken on a life of its own. Strangers sent letters from Texas, Ohio, even California, thanking me for standing up. People told me about their own HOA nightmares. Fines for curtains, for mailboxes, for the color of a garden hose. Different states, same story. It made me realize Dolores wasn't just one bad neighbor. She was a symbol of something bigger. How easy it is for power to grow where people stop paying attention. Meanwhile, Dolores disappeared. The last I heard, she'd sold her house and moved out of state. No one threw her a goodbye party. No one even noticed the for sale sign until it was gone. Sometimes I'd pass her old place and think about everything that happened. The meetings, the fines, the sleepless nights. All of it started right there. One person deciding she knew what was best for everyone else. But now, the street looked different. Kids played outside again. People left lawn chairs out without fear of a notice appearing on their door. The laughter had come back. And that was worth every minute of the fight. When the state bill finally passed, the governor held a small signing ceremony. They invited me to stand beside him. I wore the same blue suit I'd worn in court. As the cameras flashed, someone asked, "Mac, how does it feel to have a lawn named after you?" I paused. Feels like peace finally means something again. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about restoring balance, the kind that lets ordinary people live without fear of a letter in their mailbox. That night, when I came home, the whole neighborhood was waiting. Sandra had baked a cake. Tom brought out his old grill. Even the kids had made a banner that said, "Thank you, Mac," in crooked red paint. I didn't know what to say. I just laughed, maybe even cried a little. For so long, I'd been the outcast. Now, somehow, I'd become the man who gave everyone their peace back. Later that evening, after everyone went home, I sat alone on the porch again. The air was soft. The streetlights hummed. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud. Not for what I'd done, but for what we'd all survived. Then I heard a car pull up. A familiar one. Sarah, my ex-wife. She stepped out, holding a pie. "I heard about the law," she said, smiling softly. "You always did know how to make noise in quiet places." We sat together for a while, talking like old friends. No bitterness, no walls, just memories and a sense of something mended. When she left, she turned and said, "You finally found peace, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, took a few fences to get there." Funny thing is, I never set out to change anything. I just wanted to be left alone. But maybe that's how real change starts. Not with ambition, but with exhaustion. When you've had enough, and you finally decide to do something about it. Now, when I walk through Willowbrook, I see what it became. Not a battlefield, but a community again. One where people talk, laugh, argue, and still respect each other. And sometimes when I pass by that old fence, the same one that started it all, I stop, run my hand across the wood and smile. Because that fence never really kept people out. It just kept me standing tall. They say victory feels sweet. But the truth? It feels quiet. When the gavel came down that day, I didn't cheer, didn't smile. I just exhaled, a slow breath that had been trapped in my chest for almost a year. For the first time in months, I slept without my phone beside me, without checking the window for flashlights or letters taped to my door. When I woke up the next morning, the world hadn't changed much, but something inside me had. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and finally free. But peace, like always in Willowbrook, didn't last long. 3 days later, word spread like wildfire. Dolores had been removed as HOA president. Apparently, the county had opened an audit, not just on her finances, but on her conduct. Turns out, she'd been running the HOA like her own private empire, issuing fines without board approval, cashing checks into a personal operating account, even contracting her relatives for community projects. When the story broke, the neighborhood chat groups lit up. People who'd once stayed silent finally spoke up. Tom posted photos of his own fake violations. Sandra shared emails showing how Dolores had threatened to sue her for insubordination. Even Mrs. Hill admitted she'd been paying double dues because Dolores told her she was behind. It was like a collective unburdening, everyone finally exhaling after months of fear. And for once, my name wasn't the one being whispered on the street. I thought about ignoring it all, just keeping to myself. But something about seeing those people, my neighbors, finally stand tall again, it stirred something in me. So when a local reporter called, asking for comment, I said yes. They came by the house, same porch, same coffee mug, same old fence behind me. The reporter asked, "Why didn't you just move?" I smiled. Because you don't leave your home to escape bullies. You fix what's broken and make sure it doesn't happen again. That line ended up printed on the front page of the local paper. And that's when things really started to shift. A week later, I got a call from a man named Representative Alan Price. He said he'd been following my case and wanted to meet. We met at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place with coffee that tastes like courage and burnt toast. He listened as I told him everything, from the first notice to the court ruling. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You know, Mac, this isn't just a neighborhood problem. This is happening all over the state." That was the first time I heard the words Mac's Law. At first, I laughed. Mac's Law? That sounds like something out of a Western. He grinned. Maybe, but we need a name people remember. The proposal was simple. HOAs could no longer issue liens or foreclosure actions for unpaid fines alone. They'd have to prove real damage or legal costs. It also required transparency, open records, real elections, and term limits for HOA boards. It wasn't flashy, but it meant freedom, the kind that protects people like Sandra, like Tom, like me. Over the next few months, my life changed in ways I never expected. Reporters came, then lawyers, then a documentary crew. I wasn't chasing fame, but the story had taken on a life of its own. Strangers sent letters from Texas, Ohio, even California, thanking me for standing up. People told me about their own HOA nightmares. Fines for curtains, for mailboxes, for the color of a garden hose. Different states, same story. It made me realize Dolores wasn't just one bad neighbor. She was a symbol of something bigger. How easy it is for power to grow where people stop paying attention. They tell you victory is loud, parades, headlines, applause. But real victory? It's quiet. It sounds like birds at sunrise and the hum of your own thoughts when nothing's chasing you anymore. It's been almost a year since the case ended. Willowbrook looks different now. The lawns aren't perfect, and the fences don't all match, and that's exactly how it should be. The new HOA board meets once a month in Sandra's living room. No clipboards, no fines, just coffee, cookies, and conversation. They even asked me to join, but I said no. I'd had enough of rules for one lifetime. Now I help out when something breaks. Fix porch lights, rewire outlets, patch fences. People stop by, bring pies, tell me about their kids or their gardens. For the first time in years, Willowbrook feels like a neighborhood again, not a kingdom. Some mornings I sit on the porch and watch the sun hit the old fence. Same boards, same cracks. But now, every mark tells a different story. Of standing up, of staying put, of learning when to speak. Sometimes Sarah visits. We don't talk about the past much. We just share coffee and silence. She says I seem calmer now. I tell her it's because the house finally feels like home. And she laughs, says it only took a civil war to get there. Maybe she's right. But peace earned is better than peace borrowed. You know, through all of it, the fines, the hearings, the headlines, I learned something simple. Freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about not letting someone else tell you who you are. Dolores wanted to control a neighborhood. I just wanted to keep a fence. But in the end, that fence became something bigger, a line in the dirt between fear and fairness. And if there's one thing I've learned about lines, once you draw one, you'd better be ready to stand on it. The funny part? That eviction notice, the one that started it all, still hangs on my fridge. Right beside a photo of me and Sarah, smiling in front of the house the day I bought it. Two reminders side by side. What tried to break me and what made me whole again. People ask if I ever missed the quiet life I had before Dolores showed up. Sometimes, yeah. But peace without strength isn't real peace. Now, when a mail truck drives by, I don't flinch. When a neighbor walks over, I don't brace myself. And that, right there, is worth more than any fine ever written. The world keeps moving. Mac's Law made it all the way to a few other states. Lawyers call sometimes, asking for quotes, or advocacy groups send invitations. But I keep my days simple. I wake up, make breakfast, fix something, talk to people live. Because life's not about fighting forever. It's about knowing when you've fought enough. The other day, a young couple moved into Dolores's old house. Nice folks, early 30s, 2 kids, big dreams. They didn't know the history. When they asked if the neighborhood was strict, I smiled. Not anymore, I said. Welcome to Willowbrook. You like it here? They thanked me and asked if I'd help fix a light in their garage. And I did gladly, because that's how peace keeps going, one small favor at a time. Sometimes at night, I sit on the porch with the lights dimmed low. The air smells like cut grass and freedom. I think about the people who are still out there, folks fighting their own HOAs, their own bullies, their own small battles for fairness. If I could tell them one thing, it'd be this. Don't mistake quiet for peace. Sometimes peace has to be earned the hard way. And when you finally win it, hold it tight, protect it like it's the only house you've got. Because in a way it is. So that's my story. My name's Marcus McAllister, but most people just call me Mac. Once upon a time, I was the guy fighting a fence war in Willowbrook Estates. Now I'm just a man enjoying his coffee, his porch, and a little thing called peace. If my story taught you something, maybe about standing up, maybe about letting go, then share it. Tell someone else who's struggling to keep their ground that it's worth it. Because peace doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who refuse to move. I'm Mac, and this was my fight for peace.